Welcome to episode 7 of Getting Rich, our final episode for the year 2020. And what a year it has been. This year has had tons of negative news. We all know it. We've got COVID-19, the pandemic that's sweeping the world, causing the loss of lives, and there's a surge going on right now. You cannot get away from this. Hopefully the vaccines come out soon. We've seen the government's response to COVID-19. And whether you think it's right, wrong, or indifferent, they have shut down economies worldwide. Small businesses, third to half of small businesses close their doors. Many will never reopen again. We've seen stimulus going out to try and help people to make ends meet until governments allow the economies to open back up again. We've seen all sorts of protests, whether you call them peaceful or not. There's a lot of divisiveness in the nation. We had a contested election, a lot of negatives in 2020, and I think a lot of people say, good riddance, I am ready to move on. Looking at the markets this past year, we've seen the impact of stimulus and an incredible expansion of the money supply. We're at 27 trillion plus in debt, more dollars floating around in circulation than you can shake a stick at. As a result, earlier this week, we saw all the major indices in the U.S. hit new record all-time highs. We see gold reaching back up for $1,900 an ounce as it moves up over the past week. Silver's doing the same thing. It's comfortably above $26 an ounce. Platinum and palladium moving up on the coattails, and Bitcoin continues to move as well. We're seeing everything inflated. The rising tide raises all boats, right? But that kind of talks to a question we got from David. He says, I have a question. Why is the U.S. government willing to crash the value of the dollar? Has the Fed lost all control and this is their only option? Or do politicians believe it will make us more competitive with other nations? Rather than bloviating and ranting, can you give me an idea why all this is happening at such an accelerated rate? I can make no sense out of any of this other than political greed to brainwash the people and get votes. As a dollar saver, I realize I am being screwed by my own government in the world's largest Ponzi scheme. In my view, my government has in many ways become a criminal entity and in no way has the best interest in mind of true Americans. Am I just a nutcase, or do others feel this way? Looking at the polls, I see distrust of government is growing. P.S. How can there be more dollars in all of history, yet the average person has very little in savings? David, thank you so much for your question, and I read it today because I thought it may touch a chord with most of our listeners. I don't think you're the only one who's thinking these things, and I do think you hit it right on the head. I believe this is all about votes. Let's face it, Democrats, Republicans, for decades, neither one of them on either side of the aisle care a bit about fiscal responsibility. They want to get reelected. They want job security. So rather than make the tough decisions and say, you know what, we cannot afford this. We don't have enough tax revenue to pay for this or that. They just go ahead and pass it. They print more money. They dilute the dollar, and they get your vote because they gave you what you asked for. Right? So that's the easy way out. I really wish we had some politicians with some backbone and intestinal fortitude, but they all would much rather spread the cost out by diluting the dollar so everybody pays the price for their fiscal responsibility across the entire population and across generations to come. The net result is, like I said, the rising tide floats all boats. Everything of value and everything that has some sort of intrinsic value is rising in value. Even things without intrinsic value are rising in value because the dollar that we measure it with is becoming worth less and less. Okay? Now, a lot of negatives in 2020. I get it. But there's also some positives too, and I don't want anybody to lose sight of that. COVID-19 has done a lot of things. One thing it's done is it's brought families closer together. I think most people have seen more of their families in a COVID environment than they would have otherwise. Maybe, just maybe, it's causing us to think of others a bit more than we did. as opposed to just thinking of ourselves. That can't be such a bad thing. And let's face it, my golf game's getting better. I had my first hole-in-one ever this past year. So, there are positives. I'm a guy who looks at the glass, and for me, it is never half empty. It is always half full unless it's running over. And I encourage you all to look at the positives and not to dwell on the negatives. Let's tackle the negatives and let's dwell on the positives now and going into 2021. I want you to talk to us on this show. Tell us what you think, like David did. So make sure you like us and subscribe to our newsletter and our alert services, and send us your questions and comments. And with this episode, I also want you to register for our upcoming first quarter On the Move webinar. We are going to forecast for 2021 the best places to put your money, where we think metals will be, etc. And my co-host Chris Blasi of Neptune Global and I will be welcoming some fabulous guests. We have Pam and Mary Ann Aiden, the Aiden sisters, joining us at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on January 20th. You can register for that webinar also below this video. I encourage you to do that. You do not want to miss the forecast issue with the Aiden sisters. It's going to be worth your while. Next week, we're going to go ahead and talk about the key things you have to pay attention to in 2021 to make sure that you get to keep what's yours. And don't ever forget that getting rich starts with keeping what's yours. I'd be remiss if I didn't say, from our hearts to yours, we wish you and your families a very happy, healthy, safe, and prosperous 2021.